I believe Kamala Harris has to emphasize how huge the economic impacts of climate change already are for average American households. There was a study done last year that average American households are faced that 2/3 of average Americans say they are already seeing an economic impact from climate change on their bottom line, whether it's fires, whether it's home insurance, whether it's flooding, whether it's heat waves that prevent them from working. Climate change is an economic issue that is undermining our public safety, our ability to work outside, our ability to breathe clean air. And I want her to make that a kitchen table issue, something that's Trump is denying protecting Americans from an issue that is already causing us huge economic and public health harm. We have these record wildfires in California just this week as one example, but there are dozens of others. There were 30 different billion-dollar weather disasters in the United States last year. Cumulatively, weather disasters caused hundreds of billions of dollars to average Americans. So this is a problem that's right in front of us, affecting us now. And Donald Trump doesn't care. He just wants to use the issue, exploit the issue in his biased, perverse way for a political advantage, when what he's doing is risking the future of our public safety and our economy.
Well, I guess then the question is put yourself in Trump's shoes for a minute and say, how does he answer the question on climate change? I believe they asked him a question in Biden last debate, and effectively Trump ducked it. And because Biden was not really on his A game, was not really able to hold Trump's feet to the fire on that one, or really answer it, with great effectiveness.
That's right. I mean, Kamala Harris is a former state attorney general in California, a former prosecutor. She's not going to let Donald Trump off the hook on climate change. I predict that she's going to push the issue really in a tough way and have a grand moment where she demonstrates that Donald Trump is only interested in his own selfish political interests and not in the safety and long-term stability of our country and our economy. And that's a climate change issue. And so I think she'll be able to do that very effectively.
But what does Trump say this time around, if you get into the mind of Mr. Trump for a minute here?
Well, he's been attacking over the last few months the Biden-Harris clean energy effort. So he claims that, for example, it's impossible to get electrical vehicle charging, which is not true. There are more chargers than ever under Biden-Harris. They produced those. Strangely, he's contending that under Biden-Harris, we'll be buying more Chinese electric vehicles, when two things happen that are preventing that under Biden. The first thing is that we have put in place very large consumer and industry tax incentives for investments in our own electric vehicle industry. The only way for us to outcompete China is to create a more dynamic American industry. That's precisely what Biden and Harris have done with the Inflation Reduction Act and huge tax breaks. And then, ironically, the second thing is then Biden has put in place a 100% tariff on the importation of Chinese vehicles. So, in fact, the Biden-Harris policies toward electric vehicles have been far more effective than those of Donald Trump, where he sort of just allowed the Chinese to eat our lunch. And so, but he attacks with lies constantly, and I expect him to do the same tonight.
Well, I guess the question on electric chargers, I read an article about this recently, that the rollout hasn't been as smooth and hasn't resulted in as many electric chargers as we would like. And then kind of a related point is electric car production and consumer buying them has slowed down. And so what do you think's going on there?
Both those things are true. There's still a so-called range anxiety. Many Americans are reluctant to buy an EV because they worry about having a hard time finding chargers. And so there are a couple ways we can get through this. One is I worked with the Washington Post on a long article about having plug-in hybrids as an interim technologies. That's what I have now. So I have an EV effectively for about 50 miles per charge. So in 90% of the time, I never drive more than 50 miles a day. So I'm just driving on the electric battery. But I do have a backup in the plug-in hybrid of a gasoline engine on that rare occasion I need it. And in fact, the Biden-Harris administration promulgated the rules such that these plug-in hybrids could qualify for more tax credits. But ultimately, these problems are going to be solved within the next few years with new charging stations. We need to roll those out more quickly, and it is an important consumer issue. This is why I think Harris has to really focus on how the Biden-Harris administration has been focused on reducing consumer prices. And this is why she's supporting production of shale gas, because shale gas it's hit record levels of production while keeping energy prices low for average Americans. So she has to take a consumer as well as a climate change focus on energy issues.
What about LNG? So the Biden administration stalled some LNG ports down in Louisiana and I believe other places. And is that a good climate policy, but maybe not playing as well in middle America?
Actually, I don't think it's a really particularly good policy any way you look at it. What's happening here is that Russia has been dominating Europe's supply of natural gas for decades. And finally, when Putin invaded Ukraine, Europe said, we've had enough. That's it. We're not going to fund Putin's war on Ukraine by buying his natural gas anymore. And so they encouraged the U.S. to ship over exports of our very abundant liquefied natural gas, or LNG, resources. The key here is that U.S. gas has far lower life cycle emissions than the Russian gas it's replacing. And the main issue is methane. We're regulating methane very stringently from natural gas. And in fact, methane from U.S. gas has fallen substantially over the last, per metric volume over the last few years. Whereas in Russia, it's a wild West attitude. They have massive venting and flaring of methane. So Russian gas has the highest methane emissions of any gas in the world. So in fact, replacing Putin's gas with American gas not only prevents him funding the war in Ukraine, but it ends up in lower emissions. The other thing is that Europe would otherwise just turn to coal, which has higher emissions than gas too. So this has been a misconstrued issue. I think the reason the Biden administration put a pause in the LNG exports is they had grown very rapidly. And I think they wanted to take a look at the national interest here. But in fact, just 10 days ago, they approved a new one. So they have, in fact, approved additional ones because I think the overall national security and climate arguments are in favor of U.S. gas. That being said, I think Harris will emphasize that we need to regulate methane more stringently, and we do need to do that. We should be leading the world towards zero methane natural gas, which we can do. It's actually very cheap to mitigate leaks from the natural gas system. When you let the gas vent or flare, you're just losing the resource. So it turns out to be very cheap and easy to take the time to have the system be much more efficient and not allow the leakage of methane from gas. And I think the U.S. will, over time, have the lowest methane emissions in the world if it doesn't already. And that could lead to a global revolution, making natural gas much cleaner as we transition away from fossil fuels.
Well, I think that a lot of times in these debates, and probably for a lot of voters out there, there's a very simple. They're not looking at and are not as well schooled on environmental issues as you are, obviously, and so they're looking at headlines and they're saying, "Hey, Kamala Harris was against fracking. Now she's for it. Are you a flopper, Madam Vice President, or where do you stand? We know Trump was drill, baby, drill, and if we're from Western Pennsylvania, that's what we care about."
Well, it turns out, in fact, I've written a piece today in the Hill newspaper on this. Turns out that gas from Pennsylvania has far lower methane emissions than gas from the southern states, in particular Texas and the Permian Basin. So Pennsylvania gas has far lower life cycle emissions of greenhouse gases than does gas from other parts of the country. And the reason this is important is that the Texas, Louisiana, and other southern delegations have prevented regulations of small wildcatters in the South. And they're the ones who have really, really high emissions. And so that's one of the reasons why Pennsylvania gas has such low methane emissions compared to, say, Texas. The other reason is that in Texas, they're more interested in producing oil. And so they just allow the gas that's co-emitted to just vent into the atmosphere. And that's why, indeed, Pennsylvania gas has lower emissions. So I think there's an easy way forward for Harris here. Emphasize regulation of methane to make gas cleaner than Russian gas, cleaner than coal, cleaner than Texas gas. That should play very well in Pennsylvania.
I guess then the question is, moving away from maybe an environmentally focused debate to immigration and inflation, things that are maybe more challenging issues for Harris to face. How would you advise her to face issues like that?
Yeah, so this is why I say she needs to emphasize the consumer benefits of the clean energy transition. And that means lower costs, more jobs over the long run. I mean, we have been subject over our recent history to very high price spikes of oil, of foreign oil in particular. And that has been very injurious to our economy. We have kept the price of natural gas and oil fairly low under Biden-Harris, even as we produced even lower cost things like solar and wind, as well as other technologies that are coming on board. So the truth of the matter is we're creating a domestic superpower of diverse energy, including clean energy, and that keeps prices low. That is a consumer issue. And in fact, energy has been a bright spot in inflation that's otherwise essentially been caused by the hangover of demand from the COVID pandemic. So I think she's got a strong answer on inflation. On immigration, I think we have a strong answer too, which is we need to help those countries in Central America address the problems that have people flooding all over our border. It's almost impossible to stop the level of people who will come. And she's been working on that. And the other thing is that Biden put in place a really tough border protection strategy within the last 6 months. It's been more effective. And then the final thing, and I think this is the thing that will win her votes, is that the Republican Congress got behind a really tough immigration strategy that Biden said he would sign. And as soon as Trump realized it would take a campaign issue away from him, Trump ordered Republicans in Congress not to support their own proposal. And so Biden and Harris wanted to get tough on immigration, and Trump stopped it.